Hello, this is LDRSML. Good day, Australia. How's it going? Okay, this video is dedicated to the good old friendly Aussies of Australia. Just some thoughts about Australia and Aussies from my Asian point of view. Every year, New Zealand and Australia are the first to welcome the new year. But this year is kind of sad as Sydney welcomed the new year 2026 in a kind of a very somber manner. The people celebrating the new year at Sydney Harbour had to observe 1 minute silence to honour the victims of the Bondi Beach mass shootings, which killed many innocent lives. So usually in the past years, New Year's Eve in Australia is always very positive. The somber start to the new year kind of reflects the sign of the times. 2025 was quite a rough year, and 2026 can only be expected to be turbulent with many issues due to the geopolitics, especially between America and China, and as Trump continues to play his political games. Australia, despite being such a big and independent, self-sufficient country and a huge continent on its own in the southern hemisphere, Australia is still not immune to the geopolitics around the world. Post-COVID, Australia was quite a desirable place to live in. So many people wanted to go Australia to work or study. So there was a huge influx of foreigners, and the government probably tries to welcome foreigners because it needs the labor and it needs the human talents. Immigration into Australia has therefore become a big factor, contributing to the situation, contributing to the living conditions in Australia. So immigration is currently a big factor that is creating a huge demand for housing, while the supply of housing is rather restricted. As the geopolitics and instabilities, uncertainties continue in 2026, Australia remains an attractive, desirable place to live in. Many people still desire to migrate to Australia in the hope of finding a decent job and good income and to enjoy the Aussie lifestyle. The tight housing situation pushing up rents is becoming a problem in Australian cities, contributing to the rising cost of living in Australia. As big numbers of immigrants continue to arrive in Australia, the cost of living crisis persists, and many Australians have to struggle with rising living costs. Australia has a beautiful, spacious living environment, but the cities are just not designed to absorb so many people into their homes. It's not designed to have high population density because most of the suburbs are landed homes and there are not many apartment buildings. Most Australians desire to have a nice landed house with a spacious garden, so not many apartment buildings are being constructed in the cities. So as the population of the cities continue to rise, the gap between housing demand and supply continues to widen. Every country has its pros and cons. There is no country or city that is perfectly great in every aspect. So for example, a small country like Singapore with very limited land, it seems to be able to manage its housing and inflation and cost of living issues because it has designed a system that is able to absorb huge number of people into its housing. Most of the population in Singapore lives in government flats, about 80% of the population. and the rest live in private condominiums and landed houses. So landed houses are very rare in Singapore. So Singapore's housing supply grows vertically, while in Australia, the housing supply has to grow horizontally because there's not many apartment buildings being constructed. Home prices and rents in Singapore continue to rise every year, but the government is able to manage the housing issues and inflation and cost of living by building more government flats to absorb the people into public housing. Singapore actually has a huge influx of foreign workers, but all these foreign workers and immigrants are able to find housing in the government flats, in the many high-rise flats all around the island. And of course, Singapore is just beside Malaysia. Across the sea is Johor Bahru, and JB is also able to provide housing to foreign workers in Singapore. The population density in Singapore is very high. It's very crowded everywhere, and there's a lot of construction and redevelopment happening all around the island, especially in the neighborhoods and suburbs. So the people in Singapore have to tolerate a lot of noise, especially the noisy construction sites. The people have to tolerate tight spaces, and we have to tolerate the crowds. So there's friction between people, even in the community, in the government flats, where spaces are usually quite small. The Singapore design and system may seem to look great on the surface, but the people, the population, the citizens sacrifice the quality of living to some extent. The country and the government in Singapore gains by being able to manage everything more effectively, but the people lose certain freedom and individual space. The people have to accept a less than ideal environment and lifestyle, and less of nature spaces. Australians value their open spaces, their nice landed homes and spacious gardens, so they are not going to sacrifice their quality of life by having more high-rise apartments in the cities. Meanwhile, the government wants to increase the population in the cities, so there is a conflict between the government's desires and the desires for quality of life. Inevitably, the cost of living will be forced to go up. At the end of the day, the average Australians, the middle class and the lower class, the lower income Australians, are the ones who have to bear the struggles of rising costs, because the rich and the more wealthy people are less affected by rising costs and inflation. The rich and wealthy prefer to have high GDP growth, and inflation doesn't really bite into their income because they have many assets. For average Australians, it is a struggle, a real struggle, as living costs continue to rise, but their wages, their income doesn't really rise as fast. So the rents in Australian cities have gone up about 48% in the past 5 years. That is a significant amount that contributes to living costs. Australian households are expected to pay $2,000 more this year in their annual bills, paying for essentials. So that is a significant rise in the household cost. 3.7 million Australians are living below the poverty line, and these poorer people, they need food from the food banks to survive. The people who need food from the food banks are not just the lower income, even middle income Australians need to depend on the food banks for food. Inflation has moderated down to 3% in Australia, but it is still above the target of between 2 to 3%. So more than half of Australians try to skip meals to save money, and many Australians depend on credit card to pay for their essentials every month. As everything is becoming more expensive in Australia, the consumer sentiment is rather low, but the demand for food banks and charities support is getting higher. So many Australians try to cut their spending. For example, some may try to share the house with more housemates to reduce their rental burden. And half of people renting in Australia are afraid of becoming homeless because of the rising rental prices. The growing population in Australian cities and the very limited housing supply, rental vacancy is very low at 2%. So many people spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, and energy, electricity, and food costs are the second biggest cost for many Australians, people living in Australia. Child poverty is also becoming a serious problem. 16% of Australia's children are living in poverty. That is about 1 out of 6 children trying to struggle with the rising cost of living. The median house price across Australian cities has reached $1 million. That is an increase of 12% in 2025. That is a very significant increase. It is the highest price growth in the past 20 years of available price data in Australia. The house prices continue to grow strongly because there are more wealthy investors who continue to invest in nice houses, and these investors set the prices in the market. So average Australians can only struggle with these rising prices and costs. The cost of living pressures does not affect the wealthy people so much because they have properties, they have assets, and they probably have high income. So house prices continue to push higher. The more wealthy people continue to push house prices higher, and house prices usually only weaken when the job market is bad. So among Australians are seriously concerned about rising prices because they have less money to spend even on essential items. So this is impacting their mental health and motivation every day. Probably 1 out of 5 young Australians experience serious mental distress, likely due to the cost of living pressures and financial stresses. Australia is a beautiful country, beautiful continent with lots of coastal cities and towns, beautiful nature and landscapes, especially the beachside areas and the riverside areas. It is rather sad that Australians have to struggle with the rising cost of living and bear the burden of things getting more expensive every year. But apart from the cost of living issues, Australia still has other problems like crime and safety issues. As you know, the Bondi Beach mass shootings last year was quite detrimental to Australia's image. Sydney and Bondi Beach are very iconic and popular tourist destinations of Australia. So to have such a devastating terror attack that killed so many innocent people at the heart of Sydney's tourism destinations, that is a very sad thing for Australia. Bondi Beach terror attacks at the end of last year, 2025, was the worst mass shooting incident since the 1996 Port Arthur shootings. That is about 30 years ago. So this incident kind of reflects the turbulent times we are in, where there's a lot of instabilities around the world. So Australians are sad, very saddened by this incident. But Aussies remain strong because they have a very positive, strong spirit. Australia and all the beautiful Australian cities are very desirable tourist destinations for many people from around the world. So it is kind of sad that the situation in Australia currently may not be so ideal. With the cost of living pressures, the rising costs where everything is getting more expensive every year, and some of the crime and safety issues around Australia, this may not be so ideal for some tourists, and some people may choose to go to other destinations due to these issues. Australia is a beautiful continent with beautiful nature, and the Australian culture and Australian spirit is just as beautiful. So it is very sad, very pathetic that we live in a very political world where there are many corrupted, evil people who do bad things to destroy the beauty and peace of the good world. The corrupted, evil people are usually the ones who make the good, peaceful, innocent people suffer. And very often, the rot in society starts from the top. So the people in power, the government officials, the rich and wealthy people in government, to some extent they are responsible for the bad things that happen in society.
There is no country or city that is perfectly good in every aspect. Every country, every city has its good and bad points.
And the truth is, there are bad, corrupted people, evil people, everywhere in society and even in government. There are corrupted, evil people in all segments of society. Bad, corrupted people can exist in any segment of society and at any level, from the very poor to the middle class to the super wealthy and the elites and the government officials. So it is definitely good advice that the good ordinary people of society be wary and be vigilant of bad corrupted actors anywhere and everywhere, in any community and at any level, especially nowadays with a lot of online scams and the use of mobile phones is so widespread. We depend on our mobile phones for so much of our activities every day. We use the mobile phones for many of our financial transactions and business dealings. So there is a very real risk of corrupted people trying to use mobile phone interactions to scam and cheat you of your money. And not to forget, the streets, the physical places, the public spaces, crowded places can still be risky, where there may be bad, corrupted, evil people who target you in public spaces and they try to cheat, scam, and even rob you. So it is always good to be wary of your surroundings, even in any public spaces. The Bondi Beach mass shootings remind us that danger can strike anywhere and at any time. So we should always be vigilant. We should be mentally ready to respond when there is danger. The Australian immigrant who grabbed the rifle from the gunman, the terrorist, during the mass shootings in Bondi Beach, he really responded bravely to the danger. Most of us who are not familiar with guns will just run from the scene for our own safety. We will run from danger. We will not even think of confronting the gunman. So this hero, he reflects the Australian spirit and the Australian culture. This Australia immigrant, he has been living in Australia for many years. So he has assimilated into the Australian culture and the Australian spirit. So he has become part of the Australian culture. The Australian culture and spirit must have grown in him over the years. The compassionate and courageous spirit of Australians. Aussies are very sociable and people-oriented, very friendly and genuine, even when they meet strangers in public places. Aussies are very cordial to strangers and they are very responsive if you try to speak to them. So the Bondi Beach hero who grabbed the rifle without any fear, he reflects the compassionate and courageous spirit of Australians. His compassionate Australian spirit and his actions to stop the gunman probably helped to save many lives that day. So there is really something special about the Australian culture and spirit. Aussies in general are just very friendly and approachable. They are not too suspicious or judgmental of strangers. They see strangers just as human beings, just like themselves. So it's easy to speak to Aussies as if you are friends. And I think it's quite easy to make friends with Australians. So recently I was at the airport in Singapore. So I decided to do a little experiment to see how strangers react to people approaching them and speaking to them. The airport in Singapore is full of people from all over the world. So it's easy to meet and speak with people from different countries. Lots of travelers from around Asia, from Europe, from US, UK, and of course Australia and New Zealand. So there was a Japanese girl waiting for the SkyTrain, and I asked her, "Are you Japanese?" And she just nodded her head and turned away, and not interested to speak. She seemed a little suspicious of strangers. So I guess in general girls tend to be a bit more conservative and suspicious, not so willing to speak to strangers. It's understandable because, nowadays you don't know who is trying to scam you or cheat you, even on the streets. Then at one of the arrival halls, there was a Singaporean girl who was seated at the public seating playing with her mobile phone, and she had dropped something on the floor just below her. So I told her she had dropped something. She looked down and picked it up and just kept quiet. She didn't say anything and didn't even look at me, as if I was a robot or something. Not even a word of thanks. So the Asian culture, even in Singapore, can be quite reserved. And people just don't like to speak to strangers for no reason. And again, I guess girls tend to be more defensive and a little bit suspicious of strangers on the streets. So I walked through the arrival hall, and when I saw some airport staff, I asked some questions. And in general, the staff are all very friendly, I guess because they are in uniform. They have to be friendly to strangers and to be of service to anyone who approaches them. There was some airline crew who were seated around the public seats, waiting for their taxis. And when I approached them and asked them something, they were all very friendly and willing to speak with you. So I guess people in uniform, the airport staff and the airline staff, they will be very willing to speak with you and have a chat if they are not busy with anything at the time. So I continued walking and I went down to the basement and I went towards the 7-Eleven. And as I walked into the store, I saw a family that looked very Australian, a couple with 2 small kids, and they just appeared to look very Australian. And so I just asked them, "Are you from Australia?" And they were so responsive, they smiled and they replied yes. And they were so willing to have a chat with you. They had just arrived in Singapore and they were just walking around the terminal. So I told them to go to the supermarket where they could probably find more stuff at better prices compared to 7-Eleven. And they were very happy and appreciative, and they speak to you just like friends. So this family was from South Australia and probably from Adelaide. So the Australians from the smaller cities are definitely very nice people. Okay, then I took the Sky Train. I went over to another terminal where there was quite a number of flights from Australia. Flights on Qantas, Singapore Airlines and Scoot were arriving in that terminal from Australia. So I just went to one of the cafes at the terminal and sat down to have a drink, just relaxing and looking at all the travelers walking by. So apparently a flight from Brisbane had just landed some time ago and the passengers were coming out of the arrival gate. So there was this group of men, Australian men, probably from Brisbane, and they had just landed and arrived at the airport, probably on a holiday, maybe on a fly and cruise holiday. So they walked past me and they saw me having my coffee, and I smiled at them, and they all acknowledged me. They smiled and said hello. Almost every one of them, one after another, smiled and acknowledged me while I was just sitting there drinking my coffee. So this just shows how friendly Australians are, and they don't overly judge strangers. Aussies just treat strangers just like human beings like themselves, and they acknowledge you as a stranger just for just who you are. They are happy to chat with you and they are not so suspicious of strangers. So I would say Aussies are a special people of the world. Compared to many other cultures and nationalities, I think Aussies are just very friendly and approachable and compassionate, and they do not overly judge others. And Aussies are very willing to rise to the occasion, to step up, to take action where necessary, to help others, just like the Bondi Beach hero, to do what is good for other people around them. So I think it is really good to make more friends with Australians. The Australia continent itself is a beautiful and special place, down under in a special part of the world. And Australia has many animals that the rest of the world doesn't have. For example, the kangaroo, the koala, the quokka. Australia has lots of beautiful wildflowers, and the purple tree, the jacaranda tree, is so beautiful in spring. Australia has lots of beautiful coasts and beaches everywhere. Lots of beautiful natural spaces everywhere around Australia. And not to forget, Australian supermarkets have very good quality foodstuffs. Lots of very nice vegetables and fruits in the Australian supermarkets at affordable prices. If you love milk, cheese and ice cream, Australian supermarkets definitely won't disappoint you. Their dairy products and ice cream are really nice and not expensive. So I think the Aussies and the Aussie culture is special, largely because Australians live in such a beautiful land and environment with beautiful nature and animals. So the beautiful Australian land kind of shapes a beautiful Australian culture and spirit. Okay, so shout out to all the good old friendly Aussies of Australia. Good on you, mate. Despite all the challenges and issues and problems that Australia is facing currently, especially the cost of living crisis, rising prices every year, and crime and safety issues, and even the climate change issues, the extreme weather events getting more serious, especially the summer record high temperatures and very dangerous forest fires. Despite the many challenges that Aussies face, Aussies should be proud that they are very special people of the world. Aussies are very positive, very optimistic, very responsive and friendly to others, very compassionate and helpful to even strangers, very genuine and good-natured. All these qualities can be quite lacking in other cultures and other nationalities. So these qualities make Aussies and the Australian culture very special in a very often unfriendly and harsh world that we live in. So Aussies, despite all your challenges and issues, Keep up your great Australian culture and show the world your great Australian spirit, the wonderful, amazing Australian spirit. Aussies should be very proud of your compassionate, lovely soul and culture, and continue to shine the Aussie light in this often dark world. And lastly, my sincere condolences to the families who lost loved ones at the Bondi Beach mass shooting. People from all over the world have seen the senseless violence, and it is disgusting. We may not express it, but our thoughts are all with you. We all feel the pain that the families who lost loved ones are suffering. And we are really disgusted by the violence and devastation caused to the good, innocent people of Australia. Such horrible violence should never happen to beautiful Australia and wonderful Australians. To the families who lost their loved ones at the Bondi Beach attack, stay strong, persevere and keep living, and find strength in the Australian spirit. I'm sure Aussies and the beautiful Australian culture and spirit will give you strength to live through your devastating pain and trauma and deep grief. Be mentally strong. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Take care.